Call of Cthulhu, much like the 2005 title of the same name, bills itself as an adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's seminal work while having nothing to do with it. What these games are actually adapting is Shadow over Innsmouth. Cthulhu isn't even seen outside the bad ending. Cyanide Studios' history is pumping out Euro sports games like Cycling Manager. Naturally, their next step was to make an atmospheric horror game based on the Lovecraft mythos. Though I was a bit disappointed they didn't play to their strengths and have Edward put this whole Cthulhu business on hold while he participated in the Tour de France. You'd be forgiven for thinking I'm sinning vampire again. Both begin with the main character awakening in a pile of gore. Both protagonists are voiced by Anthony Howell, both of whom are World War I veterans, and both games are discussion simulators on the occult. The only difference between them is this game is mercifully short. So great job, Call of Cthulhu. You win the prestigious Better Than Vampire Award in Eurojank mediocrity.
In my wake, pulled along. Fate inescapably draws you on.
Unless this is Nyarlathotep, no elder god should be speaking English. The whole point is that they are so outside of what the human mind can comprehend that even knowing of them can drive you insane. Humans are so insignificant that they wouldn't pay any attention to us anyway. This one apparently likes to try its hand at poetry. As opposed to the existential dread of the unknown and alien found in Lovecraft's original work, this is the kind of horror one feels after waking up and discovering you forgot to close the fridge before going to bed and now all of your food is spoiled. It was all just a dream cliché. Games wouldn't be this confused over what genre they are if point-and-click adventure games were still viable. Instead, devs have to sneak adventure games through stuffed inside the cold, lifeless body of other genres like some gaming drug mule. A lot of the game's dialogue scenes are strangely off-center. When you're reviewing someone from a first-person point of view, the rule of thirds does not apply. I don't look at someone with only my right eye while my left gives me a nice view of the negative space.
Darkwater. Never heard of the place.
Is Darkwater right next to Midnight Town and Shadow Falls? Lovecraft was never this on the nose.
You must tell me if what the police suggest about the mental state of your daughter is true.
No. Sarah had visions. Everyone knew that. She never would have hurt a fly. She only thought she saw things.
Sarah didn't have mental issues. She just had visions of nightmarish creatures and saw things that weren't there. Call of Cthulhu has crystallized my belief that Europeans shouldn't be allowed anywhere near the work of classic American authors, much like how they shouldn't be allowed around the internet or copyright law. Cthulhu will remember that. It's like this game was in a contest to become either a horror game or a Morrowind retexture mod and lost both. Darkwater is an island that consists of nothing but jagged rocks and fog machines, with a whaling economy that dried up 50 years ago, yet people still live here, including the affluent rich. Kicking a stool well below its center of mass while someone is sitting on it would not cause it to tip forward.
I didn't expect to find alcohol on this island. What's the source of this miracle?
You mean who? Our source of supply wouldn't like me to betray them to the first comer.
I'll tell nobody.
She'd know it anyway.
Well, you just narrowed it down to half of the town's population, and considering there are only 3 female characters in this game and only one of them is at the bar, I think I can guess which. That's not so much a I'm drunk animation as it is a my parents made me skip one too many vaccinations animation.
Well, well. A little mouse has got lost on our turf. You're not only inquisitive, you're also stupid.
Kat, who runs a local bootlegging operation, finds Edward trying to sneak into the warehouse on her turf. She tries to kill him, but then settles for a knee to the groin and dumping him in a different alley. I guess she was very impressed with Edward's ability to assume the fetal position. Also, great job on making me feel like a hero. Later, and by later I mean 1 minute, Kat is easily talked into helping Edward access the warehouse because he has guts.
If I let you onto our turf to conduct your little affairs, you'll be indebted to me.
Edward's debt to Kat will never be followed up on. You have to pick the lock of one of your own buildings. Shouldn't you have a key? Kat made a big deal about this warehouse being on her turf and no one could get inside without her permission, but the front door is right on the wharf and guarded by a cop. Here's a quote from Lovecraft that I think the devs should have taken to heart. "It is a mistake to fancy that horror is associated inextricably with darkness, silence, and solitude." You see, besides realizing that what Americans are truly terrified of is foreigners, Lovecraft also knew that the best setting for horror was often a normal location that no longer offers safety. Comparatively, this game looks like an overachieving school principal was given a much bigger budget for this year's haunted hayride.
Night falls quickly here, and I want to be able to see when we arrive.
It's already night. Also, this advice is never followed again because Edward always investigates every location at night.
You are trying to force the door, you nosy prick!
Easy, sir, all right?
You saw Edward roll up inside a police car with an officer. Why would you get the idea that he's here to do something illegal?
You still put flowers on her grave. You cherish her memory.
Mrs. Hawkins was an exceptional person.
The groundskeeper is the one who saved Sarah's life by pulling her out of the fire, so letting anyone inside to search the house might turn up evidence that she's still alive. Also, he has no reason to keep placing flowers on her grave if he knows she's alive. The food the family was eating on the night of the fire, which was 3 months ago, was still on the table. The fire was localized entirely to this one room of the house, and the Hawkins family supposedly burned inside it. The official story is Sarah Hawkins set the fire, but unless the police found the living room door blocked, which it wasn't, there would be no way a one-room fire could kill an entire family. House fires normally kill people while they're asleep. In this case, it would be easy to get out of the one room that's burning. But instead of that being the smoking gun that convinced Sarah's father to hire Edward, it was the painting he received. Both Sarah and Charles Hawkins survived the fire, with only their son dying and leaving a body behind. Yet the police assumed the entire family died. You could make the argument that the police are in on it as part of the cult's cover-up, but we find out later they are not.
Blood.
Any blood left on the lamp would be destroyed by the fire and leave no trace. This cult member was just hanging out in the attic for no reason, since the entrance to the hidden caves under the house is downstairs. In fact, his only reason for being here is so the writers have an excuse for Edward to find this secret entrance.
The passage continues further down. Might as well start with that.
I ain't gonna squeeze in there.
You don't have to. It's a wide stairwell you can easily fit through. This is the second time Edward is attacked by a cultist while looking at the painting of himself. If the cultists consider this painting of Edward so important, you would think they would recognize him in the flesh and try not to murder him. Also, there's a pitfall directly behind Edward. These two even fall down it, which means either this guy can float or the cutscene director forgot when he had the cultists sneak up behind Edward. The pomade keeping Edward's hair in place comes undone whenever the game wants to make him look panicked or crazed, but then it's back in place right afterward with no explanation.
What are you doing here? I saw 2 odd-looking guys coming down. Seemed up to no good.
At what point do you think you might need backup? You are deep underground, confronting a clearly dangerous cult and a man that is no longer human. That must have been a load-bearing stone, because Charles causes the entire cave to collapse. Also, Charles likely would have killed the entire cult with this cave in because this is where they are based.
Your dad, he killed you.
How could Bradley have possibly survived and be in better shape than Edward? He was impaled on Charles's tentacle and was still inside when the cave caved in. I even thought that maybe Bradley only existed in Edward's head from this point on, but no, this is how they play it.
Mr. Sanders, you have to come with us.
No, please. I can't leave here.
For a guy who tore his own eyes out, Sanders certainly managed to draw and write perfectly all over his padded cell.
A friend of Ethan Bradley. It was he who told me that you had been interned here. I don't have time to explain everything. I'm not really supposed to be here. And the same goes for you, according to Ethan.
Bradley seemed just fine with Edward's being interned here. Now he's using inside help to get Edward out. The writing going to hell isn't the only sign that this is the point where the budget started running thin. The game also has these horrible stealth sections to deal with, and you will be returning to this asylum 2 more times. Do you want to know what's cheaper than producing music to create atmosphere?
Don't let it see you, or you won't be able to escape it. So don't look at it. That's how it finds you.
What finds me?
Sarah Hawkins' visitor. The Shambler.
Sanders could teach a course on how to play the pronoun game. I'm glad the dark powers kill him.
Later. We need to move on.
How do you suddenly know this place isn't what it seems when you have no memory of what happened back in the caves? Using the Hawkins mansion as a hideout doesn't strike me as a brilliant move. The secret entrance that leads down to the cult's hideout is still there and ajar.
How's our fugitive? Dr. Fuller hasn't reported your disappearance to the force, but that'll come soon.
I can sort of buy the explanation that Dr. Fuller brought Bradley back to life, but I expect a reason for doing so, like turning Bradley into his pawn. Fuller resurrected someone who was working against him and continues to do so. Also, since Bradley has no memory of what happened in the caves, why did he help Edward break the law by escaping the asylum? And why does he think they need to hide out in the mansion? Sanders left behind this recording about the Shambler in his home, but his wife never noticed it sitting right out in the open. He also kept Sarah's cursed painting of the Shambler in his home gallery, as well as a weapon that can temporarily banish it, but he never used it before being committed, and even hid the book explaining it in his piano while his wife continued living in the home. All the information is in the middle of the book cliché.
What brings you to the Sanders home?
I'm here on business. Irene asked me to liquidate all these paintings.
The cult controls the entire island, but they don't seem to mind Kat and her gang doing their own thing. She even takes the Shambler painting and the ritual knife the cult will need later. I'm a creature from beyond space and time, but damn if I can find someone right beneath me. I mean, I only evolved without eyes. What could have been an intense cat and mouse with the Shambler turns into a laughable jank fest as you try to grab the ritual knife to slash the painting.
I was attacked by a creature. I pushed it back, I think.
I think so too.
Even though I believe you, I am still going to take that cursed painting back to my hideout. Edward's investigation ability is so good, he uses it to discover that Charles broke into the Nameless bookstore and attempted to steal Drake's copy of the Necronomicon without any actual evidence that Charles was the culprit.
Drake put in a great deal of effort to hide whatever is in here.
Edward also figures out where Drake hid his recordings containing the clues to the safe combination without any evidence. He simply imagines Drake doing something and it's correct. Even the Necronomicon, a book whose every page contains dark knowledge that will change your fate, is open to the middle page. For no reason, looking at this page in the Necronomicon sends Edward's mind into the body of Dr. Colden doing her rounds in the asylum. Even if the Necronomicon has an incantation ready to send Edward's mind into the body of someone else, shouldn't he have to supply some way of directing it, like a lock of Colden's hair? The book just decided he needed to see Colden get herself killed.
This poor man is from our world, all right. But his body is undergoing unnatural mutations.
One of Fueller's patients is beginning to mutate into a monster. Not that this will matter to the plot, since it is never brought up again and isn't the cult's objective. However, since all of Fuller's experiments are done downstairs and kept away from the regular staff, why would he send a man who is no longer completely human up here to be examined by non-cult doctors? The next 30 minutes are spent playing as Dr. Colden as she learns about the inhuman experiments being conducted under the asylum, which is no new revelation since we learned that the other night when Edward had to sneak out, and he told Dr. Colden all about it in the morning.
Talk, filthy thief! I swear I'll shoot!
That's going to be difficult, since all the chambers in that revolver are empty. Dr. Colden went through a lot of trouble setting up a diversion to break into Fuller's office. Edward just comes in through the unlocked window. This hallway portal puzzle is nothing but a huge waste of your time. Otherwise, this part would have lasted 5 minutes. It starts just as Edward is heading downstairs to the basement, and ends in the exact same place. Hold on a minute, you had a gun this entire time? So back in the caves you never thought of using it? Or when the Shambler tried to kill you? Colden's body apparently knocks Edward off Fuller, but after Edward gets up, Colden is back on the table and still dead, and no explanation is offered for what just occurred. Since Edward finds Sarah Hawkins alive in the asylum basement, shouldn't that mean his job is over? Her father only hired him to find out what happened the night of the fire. At the very least, he should call the guy and tell him what's what.
The green is stronger. It's of the oldest green. Violent living, vibrant. A sea green, maybe.
Well, I think I just discovered who picked this game's color palette. How about you use the gun in your coat instead of that fire poker? Charles was so upset that Edward was the one Sarah and Cthulhu chose that he's been acting against the cult this entire time, which makes me wonder why he was down in the caves leading a cult ceremony, and why he sent one of Sarah's paintings to her father, which involved Edward in the case. A bullet through the head the other night did nothing to Charles, but a fire poker in the neck just about kills him. Where did you get that? There was no axe anywhere in the room, or I'm sure you would have started with that instead of the poker.
I'll do anything to get him back. Anything.
That should be setting off alarm bells in Edward's head, since there's only one thing that could possibly bring the dead back to life, and that's an elder god. And maybe Dr. Fuller since he brought Bradley back. Okay, 2 things, one of which would involve finding out how Fuller can revive the dead, and the other summoning an ancient and terrible god that sings the song that ends the world that your son will have to live in. What exactly knocked Sarah out during the fire? She hit Charles with a lamp, and for whatever reason that flung her back and knocked her unconscious. Also, how are you recalling things you were unconscious for? On the night of the fire, Charles left the door open while running away while burning, but when the groundskeeper saved Sarah, the door was shut. Toy is a stand-in for child's death cliche. We just saw that toy soldier burn. How can you then transition into the same toy looking just fine?
I know what I owe you, Mr. Pierce. But I can't come back to Boston with you.
You don't really have to. Edward's job is complete. He was only hired to find out if you set the fire that killed your family. No one expected to find you alive. Edward has no reason to stay in this town, but does so inexplicably.
He found something. An amulet. The symbol engraved on it could protect Sarah.
Why would the key of Rilla, the city where Cthulhu sleeps, possess the power to ward off madness? Isn't that the complete opposite of what it should do?
I found this drawing among his personal effects. I think that it has something to do with the location of the amulet.
And why would Charles need to make a drawing of a bust that contains another drawing of a different stone bust that hides a necklace that he himself stole and hid in his own house?
Chief West is here with Sullivan.
And the cops knew Edward was hiding in the Hawkins mansion how? Also, why not show Sarah to the police who believe her dead and explain that she was being locked away under the hospital by Fuller, the very guy who sent the police after Edward?
Entering private property. Twice. Aggression. Insulting behavior.
Insulting behavior is a crime?
Come on, I'll show you to your new residence.
You've already led Edward to his cell, and now you're walking away after saying that.
I am the one men named Leviathan.
As if this game didn't have enough similarities between itself and vampire, now it has a transparent fluid in human form communicating with Edward. Well, Edward refused Leviathan's offer, but it still sends his mind into Sarah's body regardless. I thought that was what the Necronomicon was supposed to do.
If the dimensional shambler is to appear, he will do it here. The shambler! I knew it!
Let me just run ahead of you into the mouth of danger like an idiot.
Hey! You can't leave us!
Sorry, old friend, but it's either you or me.
No!
You could have let him get away. The iron gate seems to be keeping the shambler inside the cave.
He's getting stronger and more aggressive. If he catches up with you, try and blind him.
Try blinding the monster with no eyes? Something tells me you should not take Drake's advice. Wasn't the amulet supposed to protect Sarah from falling under the influence of Cthulhu again? It's never seen again after Edward found it. Almost like it was an idea that they put in the game, then forgot about.
I never would have thought you so naive. It's all your fault. You could have stopped this whole thing.
Hallucinations will always tell you how much you suck, cliché. Leviathan shows up again and sends Edward's mind into the body of yet another woman. Either it's trying to convince Edward to become a thrall of Cthulhu, or convince him to get a sex change. Just a moment ago, Kat was at the gang's hideout after it was attacked by the Shambler. Experiences with alien monsters are supposed to drive people to the edge of sanity in Lovecraft fiction. Kat seems perfectly fine after seeing her men butchered by a monster. The Evil Dead was able to get away with using zombies because the only thing it lifted from Lovecraft was the Necronomicon. This game is set inside the mythos. So zombies are a big old sin staring you right in the face.
Take that weapon, you'll need it.
Games based on Lovecraft go from bad to worse the moment they give you a gun. It happened in the 2005 Call of Cthulhu, and it happens here. At least that game had actual first-person shooting mechanics. Here the gun doesn't even need aiming or reloading, and only runs out of ammo once you enter the whaling station.
Go get me a first aid kit. I might have something for you.
I must go to the whaling station.
I'll help you get there if you bring me something to fix this wound.
Let's see, do I want to save the character I've spent time learning about and even controlling? Or would I rather save the bartender who I met only once and has had nothing to do with the plot? This would have made more sense if I was forced to choose between Bradley and Kat, but I had to choose a killer spare Bradley back at the police station. And ultimately, your choice doesn't matter, since you never see Kat or the bartender again.
Hither thou shalt be free.
Quoting Shakespeare's The Tempest cliché, just because your plot deals with insanity doesn't give you a free pass on making sense. Show me all the weird imagery you want. But after several minutes of thinking about it and still being clueless about what's going on, I conclude the devs didn't either and are trying to hide the lack of a cohesive narrative behind a bunch of random visions. That gun ran out of ammo back on the dock.
You think you're here of your own accord?
After spending all of his time on Fuller and Charles, both are shoved off stage to make way for the true villain, Fitzroy, the ship captain Edward talked to for 5 minutes at the beginning of the game. 50 years ago, Leviathan allowed a whaling ship from Darkwater to capture it, who brought its body back home where the townspeople decided they were totally cool with eating the flesh of a sea monster, were corrupted by it, then formed the cult with the goal of awakening Cthulhu. To do that, they needed a truth seeker, someone in tune with Cthulhu's dreams, which for some unexplained reason is Edward. That all sounds good, but Edward has free will to choose or refuse to summon Cthulhu, and Leviathan, for all of his 50 years of planning, hasn't really given Edward any compelling reason to choose to end the world. All it's done is show him a few creepy visions and try to drive him mad. Normally in a story like this, you would tempt the main character with a Faustian bargain, but Edward was never developed beyond being a World War I vet, and even that is only mentioned twice during the game.
None of this is real. I saw you dead, as I see you now.
Is it really that hard to believe? Fuller brought Bradley back to life. At least this time he made sure the resurrected person came back on the side of the cult. Can you tone down the green filter a bit? This looks like one of my attempts at making a level in the Source engine.
What abject substance did you use to turn her into an empty shell?
Abject substance would make a great subtitle for this game. Teleportation is always used to be a dick cliché.
I can't let you do this.
No one can force you.
Turns out, Cthulhu is pretty reasonable. So did Cthulhu not have a plan B in case this happened? What is the cult going to do now that Edward rejected the ritual?